House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 1, starts with Rhaena finally getting the thing she has wanted for years. In the mountains of the Vale, she comes face to face with Sheepstealer, the wild dragon that has lived outside the neat control of the royal family. For Rhaena, this is not just a dragon scene. It is a character payoff. She has spent most of her life as the Targaryen, without the one thing that seems to define Targaryens. Other people in her family have dragons, status, military value, and a clear place in the war. Rhaena has often been left standing near the edge of that identity, close to power but not fully inside it. So when Sheepstealer accepts her, the moment feels satisfying because it answers years of frustration. But the episode does not present this as a clean victory. Sheepstealer is not a trained court dragon. He is wild, unpredictable, and clearly not interested in behaving like a polite political asset. Rhaena may have claimed him, but claiming a dragon and mastering a dragon are not the same thing. That distinction becomes one of the most important ideas in the premiere. Power can be gained very suddenly in this world, but control is much harder. Rhaena gets the thing she wanted, and the episode immediately asks whether she understands what that thing can cost. The story then shifts to King's Landing, where the Greens are trying to look powerful while everything around them becomes less stable. The throne room imagery is strong. The doors open, the Iron Throne dominates the frame, and the court still has all the symbols of authority. On the surface, this is the side with the crown, the capital, the ceremony, and the structure of government. But the episode makes it clear that the symbols are doing a lot of work. Aegon is not the confident king the Greens need him to be. The war has damaged him physically and politically. Even when he is present, the question hanging over the room is whether he can actually lead anything anymore. That is what makes the Green position so uneasy. They have the Iron Throne, but they do not have peace. They have royal language, but not real unity. They have power, but the power is spread through damaged people with very different instincts. Aemon stands at the center of that tension. He has always believed he was the stronger son, the more disciplined son, the one who should have been taken more seriously. Now, circumstances have moved him closer to the power he wanted, and that should make the Greens stronger. Instead, it makes them more dangerous. Aemon does not feel like a stabilizing presence. He feels like a grievance with a dragon attached to it. He projects confidence, but confidence is not the same thing as judgment. The episode understands that difference. This is where Alicent's position becomes important. She can still speak to Aemon. She can still try to shape him. But she can no longer simply command him. The family dynamic has changed. The son she once tried to guide has become a political force of his own. So when Alicent appeals to him, the scene is not only about strategy. It is about a mother realizing that direct control is gone. She reaches for validation, because that may be the only tool left. She tells him what he wants to hear, or at least what part of him has always wanted to hear, that he should have been king. The conversation is revealing because nobody in that room is really speaking freely. Alicent is trying to influence him. Aemon is trying to prove that he does not need influence. And the war keeps moving regardless of what either of them wants. The result is not peace. It is another step toward escalation. The episode then moves away from King's Landing and into the wider war. Aemon's flight toward the campaign, the movement of armies, and the military planning scenes all serve the same purpose. They show that the dance is no longer just a family crisis happening in chambers and corridors. It has become logistics. Men are moving. Camps are forming. Fleets are preparing. Distance and timing now matter as much as bloodlines. That shift is important because once a war reaches this stage, no single person can fully control it anymore. Even a king, a queen, or a prince with a dragon can only influence pieces of the machine. The rest keeps moving. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra is still trying to find a path that avoids total devastation. That is one of the most important differences between her and some of the people around her. She does not want the throne badly enough to pretend the cost is meaningless. She understands that if King's Landing burns, if armies slaughter each other, if dragons turn cities into ash, then victory itself becomes corrupted. so the possibility of a less destructive solution still matters to her. But the people around her are much less willing to trust that possibility. Jace is especially skeptical, and his skepticism makes sense. He has already lost Luke. He knows that intentions do not protect people once dragons enter the sky. From his point of view, every plan that depends on enemies behaving reasonably is a dangerous fantasy. That is why the conflict between Jace and Rhaenyra works. It is not simply brave queen versus cowardly advisors. It is not simply mother versus son. Both sides have logic behind them. Rhaenyra wants to act because she is the queen, and because the battle may decide the future of her cause. Jace wants to stop her because if she dies, the entire Black Claim may collapse with her. His decision to keep her away from the fighting is strategically understandable. It is also emotionally brutal. When Rhaenyra is shut inside her own apartment, the scene briefly plays almost like dark comedy. The queen who wants to command the war is being protected so aggressively that she becomes a prisoner in her own home. But the longer the scene goes, the less funny it becomes. The door matters because it turns a political argument into a physical image. Rhaenyra is not just being advised. She is being contained. That is a dangerous line for Team Black to cross. Jace may be saving his mother's life, but he is also showing the rest of the faction that overruling her can be called loyalty. That idea could become very damaging later, especially if grief makes Rhaenyra less willing to trust anyone around her. The apartment scene continues that emotional pressure. Rhaenyra alone with her bloodied hands is one of the clearer images in the episode. She has not been defeated in battle, but she has been humiliated by her own side. She is alive, but she has been forced out of the decision. The torn dress makes the symbolism obvious, but it works because the emotion is already clear. The queenly image is coming apart while the actual queen is locked away from the war she is supposed to lead. That is why this scene should not be treated as filler between larger events. It shows the emotional cost of protecting Rhaenyra, before the episode reveals the military cost of not having her in the fight. Meanwhile, Corlys and the Valyrian fleet bring the episode into its largest set piece, the Battle of the Gullet. The setup matters because this is not just a random naval battle. The Triarchy fleet is trying to break the blockade and reopen access to King's Landing. Corlys is trying to hold the sea because the sea is one of Team Black's biggest advantages. At first glance, the Blacks should have the upper hand. They have dragons. In Westeros, dragons usually mean the argument is almost over. A fleet should be especially vulnerable to dragonfire, because ships cannot run from the sky the way armies can scatter across land. But the episode immediately complicates that assumption. Triarchy is not helpless. The fog, the rocks, the packed ships, and the anti-dragon weapons all change the battlefield. This is not a clean open space where dragons can simply dominate. It is a crowded trap full of smoke, water, fire, and bad information. That is why the battle works. It does not make dragons weak. It makes the situation complicated enough that even dragons can be used badly, trapped, wounded, or thrown into confusion. The first phase of the battle still gives the Blacks their spectacle. Dragons sweep over the water. Ships burn. The fleet takes damage. For a moment, it looks like dragon power may be enough. But every advantage creates a new problem. The more fire spreads, the harder the battlefield becomes to read. The more ships break apart, the more chaotic the water becomes. The more dragons enter the same space, the harder coordination becomes. Corlys understands naval war better than almost anyone alive, but even he cannot fully control this kind of battle once it begins to collapse. The Queen Who Never Was gives his part of the battle extra emotional weight. That ship is not just a military asset, it carries the memory of Rhaenys. So, when the ship is damaged, the loss is personal as well as strategic. Corlys is not only watching wood and sail break apart, he is watching another piece of his family history get dragged into the war. Lohar's role also matters because the Triarchy is not presented as faceless cannon fodder. Lohar gives the opposing side a sharper presence. The battle becomes a contest between commanders, not just dragons burning nameless ships. That makes the damage to Corlys and his fleet feel earned rather than random. Then, Rhaena arrives on Sheepstealer. In a simpler version of the story, This would be the heroic turn. A new dragon rider enters the battle, the blacks regain control, and the enemy is overwhelmed. But this episode is not interested in simple dragon victories. Because Sheepstealer is wild, and Rhaena does not yet have full control, the dragon's arrival creates as much confusion as advantage. Fire spreads through a battlefield that is already too crowded. Allies and enemies are too close together. What should be a rescue becomes another source of danger. This is where the opening scene pays off. Rhaena got the dragon, but the episode warned us from the beginning that getting a dragon is not the same as commanding one. That does not mean the clean answer is that Rhaena alone is responsible for what battle has next. Too many causes for that. The Triarchy prepared well. The battlefield is chaotic. Vermax is vulnerable. Corlys's fleet is under enormous pressure. Jace and Bela are making decisions in the middle of smoke and panic. But Rhaena's arrival does make the situation worse at exactly the wrong moment. The dragon power that was supposed to save Team Black becomes another thing Team Black cannot fully control. Then Vermax is hit. This is the moment where the battle stops feeling like spectacle and starts feeling like tragedy. A wounded dragon is not a machine with damaged parts. It is a living creature in pain, and that pain changes everything around it. Vermax being struck proves that the enemy has adapted to dragon warfare. The Triarchy is not simply waiting to be burned. They have weapons designed for this exact threat, and once one of those weapons lands, the whole battle shifts. Jace and Bela's courage is not in question. They are brave. They enter a battle that could easily kill them. They try to protect each other and protect the fleet, but courage does not automatically create control. That is one of the cruel points of the episode. Jace made the argument for keeping Rhaenyra away because he understood risk. He knew the Black Cause could not afford to lose its queen. But then he takes the risk himself, and the war punishes him for it. His death is shocking because it is not clean or glorious. He does not die in a perfect heroic duel. He does not get a grand final speech. The sequence is fast, messy, and practical in the ugliest way. The dragon falls, the water takes him, and the battle keeps moving. That simplicity makes it more painful. Jace mattered because he was not only another dragon rider, he was Rhaenyra's heir. He was her son. He was one of the few people who could challenge her and still clearly be on her side. He represented a possible future for Team Black that was more stable than the present. He had enough caution to question Rhaenyra, enough loyalty to protect her, and enough courage to fight when he believed he had to. Losing him removes more than military strength. It removes a political bridge inside Rhaenyra's own family. By the end of the battle, the question is no longer whether the Blacks won or lost a naval engagement. The bigger question is what the battle has done to the people who survived it. Corlys survives, but his losses keep deepening. Rhaena has finally gained a dragon, but her first major use of that power is tied to disaster. Bela survives the battle, but she now carries the memory of watching Jace and Vermax fall. And Rhaenyra survives because Jace kept her away, but that survival comes with the worst possible price. The episode begins with Rhaena claiming power and ends with Rhaenyra losing her future. That contrast captures the premiere better than any single battle statistic. Every major character gets some version of what they wanted. Aegon still has the image of kingship. Aemond gets closer to the power he thinks he deserves. Alicent gets a chance to influence him. Rhaenyra is protected. Rhaenyra gets Sheepstealer. The Blacks bring dragons to the Gullet, and none of it gives them real control. That is the central idea of the episode. Dragons can burn fleets, but they can also be wounded. Crowns can create authority, but they cannot heal a broken family. Protection can save a queen, but it can also isolate her. A victory can arrive and still feel like the beginning of something worse. Episode 2 now has to deal with the consequences. Who tells Rhaenyra exactly what happened? Does anyone blame Rhaenyra? Does anyone blame Corlys? Does Rhaenyra blame herself for being absent, or Jace for locking her away, or the council for allowing the battle to unfold without her? Those questions matter because grief in this family rarely stays private. It becomes policy. It becomes revenge. It becomes suspicion. So, the premiere is not just the big battle episode. It is the episode where almost every faction learns the same lesson. Power is easier to claim than it is to control. And in the Dance of the Dragons, losing control is usually when the real damage begins. That is the Premier's real warning. Power is easier to claim than it is to control.